Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's like this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, like it's mechanical.
Yeah, exactly. Mechanical engineering. You fall off a ladder, you break your arm, they take an x-ray, and it shows that jagged white line on the film, and the doctor just points and says, well, there it is. That's the problem.
Right, it's entirely binary. The bone is either intact or it's fractured.
Exactly.
And because it's so visible, and measurable, the solution is standard. You set the bone, cast it, wait.
But then you step out of the hospital and into like the world of sociology or into the mechanics of gender dynamics and cultural evolution. And suddenly that x-ray machine is just utterly useless.
Oh, completely useless.
We're looking at this societal landscape that is incredibly murky. We're trying to diagnose an undercurrent, right? A massive cultural shift that's leaving a huge demographic of the population feeling like they're living in this padded, sterile room, when what they actually crave is the jagged, dangerous frontier.
Yeah, and it's a diagnostic puzzle where everyone is violently arguing over the symptoms, let alone the root cause.
Right.
Because when you can't take a snapshot of a societal fracture, the debate becomes about whether the pain people are feeling is actually real, or if it's just, a symptom of them failing to adapt to a changing environment.
Which brings us to the core of what we're unpacking today. Welcome to you, the listener, to today's deep dive.
We had a lot to cover.
We really do. But before we take another step forward into this material, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the show. It genuinely helps us continue bringing you these extensive breakdowns.
And you are not going to want to miss the deep dives we have scheduled in the coming weeks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because today, our mission is massive. We are doing an in-depth review of an incredibly provocative, highly controversial new ebook. It's titled Mending Broken Men, Overcoming Safetyism and Unlocking Anti-Fragility by Conrad Reicher.
Yeah, and this text is causing absolute shockwaves across multiple cultural spheres right now. I mean, it is not a quiet academic release by any stretch.
No, not at all. It's making huge waves. If you're someone who follows the manosphere, or men's rights activism, or if you're simply trying to map out the argument that modern American institutions have been systematically captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies over the past century, this book is quickly becoming a primary source document.
Yeah, it's really a raw, unapologetic look at a worldview that's gaining serious, measurable traction.
It is. And I want to note right at the top, if you find yourself hooked by this breakdown and you want to analyze the text for yourself, you can and absolutely should grab a copy of the ebook.
Highly recommend reading it directly.
Yeah, it's available right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. You can also follow the author directly at Conrad Reicher on Substack to see how his theories are developing in real time.
Reading the source material directly is crucial here because, Reicher's tone, which really oscillates between clinical analysis and outright hostility toward modern systems, is as much a part of the argument as his data sets.
That is an excellent point. And it leads directly into a critical disclaimer we really need to establish before we go any further.
Right, the neutrality piece.
Yes. The material we are analyzing today contains highly politically charged viewpoints. It wades deep into gender politics, institutional bias, and biological arguments that are fiercely, sometimes violently, debated in the public square.
Very heavily debated.
So I want to be explicitly clear to you, the listener. Neither I nor the expert are taking sides here.
No, we are not endorsing Conrad Reicher's viewpoints, nor are we condemning them.
Exactly. Our mission today is strictly journalistic.
We're basically here to dismantle the engine of his argument and show you how the parts fit together.
Right. Our goal is to unpack Reicher's exact arguments, dissect the data he uses to build his case, and help you understand the core concepts contained in the text. We're just your guides through the material.
And we have a pretty complex roadmap ahead. To truly understand Reicher's thesis, we have to look at the foundational layers he lays down.
Where do we start?
So we'll start with what he identifies as the biological and cultural softening of men. From there, we examine how he connects that biological shift to the systemic capture of institutions, specifically family courts, academia, and the military.
Right.
Then we'll look at the fallout he observes,
Right.
the marriage strike and the digital escapism of modern men. And finally, we'll explore the climax of his book, which is his proposed underground solution. A parallel societal structure he calls the bastion economy.
Okay, so let's start at the very bedrock of Reicher's premise, which relies heavily on evolutionary biology. He basically argues that men are biologically engineered for chaos, for friction, and for overcoming physical obstacles.
Right.
But modernity has systematically removed that friction, trapping men in what he calls safe spaces.
Yeah, he essentially argues there's a fundamental mismatch between male evolutionary biology and the sanitized, risk-averse world we've constructed in the 21st century.
A padded room.
Exactly. He calls this overarching paradigm safetyism.
And he traces the inception of this safetyism back to early childhood conditioning, to a concept he calls prizeflation, which I find this to be such an interesting economic analogy applied to sociology. But I want to understand the actual mechanics behind it.
It's a really specific mechanism.
Yeah, he makes this highly specific comparison between generations, looking at millennials raised in the era of best try ribbons versus what he calls the 1980s Mario Kart generation.
Right, the pixelated humiliation generation.
Exactly. And he cites data suggesting the best try demographic is twice as likely to quit a job after receiving minor criticism. But how exactly does a plastic participation trophy rewrite a generation's resilience?
So to understand Riker's mechanism here, you have to look through the lens of evolutionary psychology and dopamine feedback loops.
Okay, dopamine loops.
Yeah, he isn't just doing the whole kids these days are soft complaint. He's making a structural argument about how dominance hierarchies function in the human brain. He references the neurochemistry of achievement.
So what happens in the Mario Kart scenario?
Well, in that scenario, a child experiences brutal, pixelated humiliation from an older sibling. They lose. The screen flashes game over, and they are physically forced to hand over the controller.
Which feels terrible.
Right. They sit with that failure, which spikes cortisol. That's the stress hormone. So to alleviate that cortisol and achieve a dopamine hit, they have to actually adapt. They have to improve their hand-eye coordination and earn the win.
Okay, so the friction itself is the mechanism for neurological growth.
Precisely. Riker argues that this generation learned resilience through that exact friction. And that's why they now ruthlessly dominate highly competitive fields like hedge funds or tech startups.
Wow, okay.
Conversely, he argues that handing out victory royales or participation trophies completely short-circuits that neurological loop.
Because there's no cortisol spike.
Exactly. If the dopamine reward is given simply for existing, the brain never builds the neural pathways required to process and overcome failure.
Oh, I see.
So, when that child becomes an adult and their manager hands back a report covered in red ink, they literally lack the psychological scaffolding to handle it, leading to what Riker describes as demands for HR interventions over routine professional friction.
It perfectly maps onto the concept of hyperinflation in economics. Like,
Right.
if a central bank just prints money endlessly to solve a crisis, that currency loses its intrinsic value.
Exactly. A $100 bill doesn't mean anything if everyone just gets a million of them.
Right. So Riker is essentially asking, if you print too many trophies, if you hand out accolades absent of actual achievement, does the concept of excellence itself lose its social value?
Yes, it does, and he takes it a step further. He argues that when a society actively removes merit-based competition, it doesn't create a peaceful, egalitarian utopia.
It creates the opposite.
Yeah, it creates a collapsed social order. He points out that dominance hierarchies exist in literally every species with a central nervous system, so when you artificially suppress that hierarchy, you force the highly competent to subsidize the mediocre.
Which breeds resentment.
Deep systemic resentment, according to Riker.
But is this entirely cultural? Because if it's just a matter of how we hand out trophies, that seems reversible, right? You just change the parenting style.
You think so, yeah.
But Riker doesn't stop at culture. He transitions into biology. And this is where his claims become significantly more alarming. He argues that men aren't just being psychologically conditioned to be weak, they're experiencing active chemical castration through environmental factors.
Yeah, this is a really crucial pivot in his book. He moves away from sociology and straight into endocrinology. He dedicates a massive section to what he calls the estrogen flood.
And the data he pulls for this section is startling. I mean, he relies heavily on a 2017 meta-study by Dr. Haggai Levine, which tracks sperm counts globally.
The numbers are pretty intense.
The top-line statistic is staggering. Since 1973, the average man's sperm count has plummeted by 59%.
59%.
That is not a margin of error. If that data is accurate, a 59% drop over just a few decades implies a systemic collapse of biological function. What exactly is the mechanism driving a drop that precipitous?
Well, Riker places the blame squarely on environmental factors, specifically endocrine disrupting chemicals, or xenestrogens.
Senestrogens, what are those?
They're synthetic chemicals that essentially mimic the molecular structure of estrogen. Because they look like estrogen, The male body's cellular receptors bind to them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it basically tricks the endocrine system into reacting as if the body is flooded with female hormones. And that heavily disrupts testosterone production and spermatogenesis.
He gives a very tangible example of this, right? Using the U.S. Geological Survey data from 2023 regarding the Potomac River.
Yes, the Potomac River Basin study. This is wild.
Yeah.
Scientists analyzed smallmouth bass downstream from major wastewater treatment plants, and they discovered that 80% of the male bass showed intersex traits.
Wait, 80%?
80%. They were literally producing eggs in their testes.
Wait, producing eggs? How does the water supply get that saturated with estrogen in the first place?
So Riker points to oral contraceptives. Millions of women take birth control pills daily. The synthetic estrogen in those pills, specifically ethylene estradiol, is excreted in urine.
And it goes into the water system.
Right. Modern municipal sewage treatment plants were designed to filter out solid waste and bacteria, but they are largely incapable of filtering out these micromolecular pharmaceutical metabolites.
That's terrifying.
So this highly concentrated synthetic estrogen is flushed directly into the river systems. Riker's implication is dark but direct. If the ambient water supply is fundamentally altering the biological sex characteristics of the wildlife, what is it doing to the human males who rely on that exact same municipal water?
He basically views it as a physical manifestation of ideological capture. I think the quote he uses in the book is, "Our grandfather's rivers ran with trout. Ours flow with woke."
It's a highly provocative framing.
Extremely provocative. But it takes an invisible ecological issue and turns it into this targeted biological threat. And he doesn't just stop at the municipal water supply either.
No, he finds it everywhere.
Right. He points to bizarrely mundane, everyday objects as vectors for this chemical alteration. For instance, he issues a severe warning about thermal receipts, like the kind you get at the grocery store or the pharmacy.
Yeah, and that's because of BPA, or bisphenol A, which is a known endocrine disruptor.
Right.
Thermal paper doesn't use ink. It's actually coated in a chemical layer containing BPA that changes color when exposed to heat.
But come on, how much BPA can a person realistically absorb just by holding a receipt for 5 seconds while putting it in their wallet? Is he exaggerating the threat level here?
Well, Riker cites studies showing that dermal absorption of BPA from thermal receipts is actually highly efficient, especially if your hands are damp or if you have just used hand sanitizer, which acts as a penetration enhancer.
Oh, hand sanitizer makes it absorb faster.
Dramatically faster. So he argues that men are absorbing these estrogen-mimicking chemicals directly into their bloodstream multiple times a day.
Wow.
His advice is incredibly stark. He tells men to avoid receipts like propaganda, and if they absolutely must touch one for business purposes, he tells them to wear gloves.
He actually says to wear gloves for receipts.
Yes. He claims that the modern man's body is carrying enough ambient estrogen-mimicking chemicals to, as he puts it, make a birth control pill blush.
Man, it really forces you to look at your daily routine through a completely different lens. A trip to the grocery store, getting a coffee, grabbing a plastic water bottle. Riker reframes the absolute banality of modern life into an active biological battleground.
Every single interaction is a risk, in his view.
But if the environment is this saturated, what is his proposed solution? Because he doesn't just present the doom, right? He offers a methodology for reversing it.
He does. He advocates for a total dietary and lifestyle overhaul, heavily leaning into what he calls Paleo 2.0, or a strict carnivore diet.
Okay, so lots of meat.
Tons. His theory is that modern men need to literally sweat out the soy and rebuild their endocrine systems from the ground up using ancestral methods.
And he goes surprisingly deep into the mechanics of grilling meat over charcoal. He claims that men who grill meat weekly exhibit a 31% higher baseline testosterone level.
It's a very specific claim.
I have to push back here, though. Is the act of grilling actually altering hormones, or is he just correlating a stereotypically male activity with guys who already have higher testosterone?
Riker actually argues there is a biological mechanism. He theorizes that the high heat and the charcoal itself, which, is used medically to bind to toxins in hospitals, somehow aids in processing and eliminating xenestrogens.
Oh,
Though he admits mainstream medicine hasn't certified this specific pathway.
naturally.
Right. He even includes a rather dismissive anecdote about the Mayo Clinic, stating that because their cafeteria serves kale smoothies, you shouldn't wait for their peer-reviewed study, but instead trust the ancestral intuition of the guy flipping ribeyes over a dumpster fire.
It's just a complete rejection of institutional medicine in favor of primal intuition.
Absolutely complete rejection.
He is essentially saying that you cannot talk therapy your way out of a chemical imbalance caused by environmental toxins.
Yeah.
You have to lift heavy weights, consume animal fats, and aggressively rebuild the biological foundation of your masculinity.
Exactly. But this biological argument, you have to understand, is just the preamble. For Riker, the softening of male biology is merely the prerequisite for what he views as the main event, the systemic capture of society's institutions.
And this is where we transition from biology to structural power. Riker asks, if men are biologically degraded, how does society reorganize itself?
Right.
He argues that as male physical and cultural authority wane, institutions, the courts, the schools, the government apparatus, were captured by progressive, feminist, and Marxist ideologies.
He refers to this overarching system as the gynocracy playbook.
The gynocracy playbook. Okay. To explain how this capture occurred, he points to a very specific moment in 1965, the Daniel Patrick Moynihan Report. Why is this report the linchpin of his historical argument?
So, Daniel Patrick Moynihan was the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Labor under President Lyndon B. Johnson. In 1965, he authored a report analyzing the breakdown of the nuclear family, focusing specifically on the black community at the time.
Okay.
Moynihan issued a dire warning, predicting that a 25% out-of-wedlock birth rate would trigger a tangle of pathology.
A tangle of pathology.
Yes, meaning generational cycles of poverty, crime, and educational failure stemming directly from the absence of fathers in the home.
But if a high-level government official issues a warning that stark, why was it buried? Riker claims the Johnson administration and the media completely suppressed it.
Riker's analysis is that the report contradicted the emerging progressive narrative of the Great Society programs.
Oh, yeah.
Feminist groups and certain civil rights leaders labeled the report's focus on the nuclear family as racist or patriarchal. Consequently, LBJ distanced himself from it. And Riker claims legacy media outlets like the New York Times effectively maintained radio silence on the predictive warnings of the report for 3 decades.
And Riker uses modern statistical data to argue that Moynihan wasn't just right, he was actually too conservative in his estimates, and that this pathology has now transcended race and infected the entire lower and middle class.
The numbers he brings up are intense.
They really are. He points to Chicago's South Side, noting that a staggering 72% of children there are currently growing up in fatherless homes. But how does he connect that to crime mathematically?
He cites Brookings Institute data which demonstrates a brutal correlation. For every 1% increase in single-mother households in a given zip code, there is a corresponding 3% rise in teen crime.
Wow, 1-to-3 ratio.
Yeah. He then layers that with 2023 Department of Justice data showing that 85% of young men in the prison system come from fatherless homes.
85%. If that number holds up under scrutiny, it suggests that fatherlessness is the single greatest predictor of criminality in young men. Right. Superseding poverty or education levels entirely.
Yes.
But Riker doesn't just blame individual choices for this. He blames systemic design. He argues the state actively engineered this fatherlessness. How does he justify that leap?
He points to the mechanics of the welfare state. Riker argues that welfare policies financially incentivized women to basically marry the state instead of relying on husbands.
Marry the state.
By providing housing, food stamps, and financial aid strictly to single mothers, the government effectively priced working-class fathers out of the market. The state replaced the patriarch with bureaucrats, creating a dependency loop.
So they don't need the fathers.
Right. And if the state acts as the provider, the citizens become permanently dependent on the state, which Riker views as the ultimate goal of ideological capture.
And that transition of power from the patriarch to the state brings us directly to what Riker considers the enforcement arm of this new system, the modern family court system, or as he calls it, the divorce industrial complex.
Yes. He paints an incredibly hostile picture here, describing it as a $50 billion annual industry.
50 billion.
Yeah, he breaks down the economics of divorce to show how it functions as an extraction mechanism. He details lawyers charging $300 an hour, mediators, custody evaluators, and therapists billing $200 a session just to determine who gets the midsize SUV.
Just extracting value at every step.
Exactly.
But the real venom in his argument is aimed at the gender disparity within this system. He cites Census Bureau data from 2022 showing that women initiate 70% of all divorces, yet men pay roughly 90% of all alimony.
Right.
He literally refers to modern marriage as a state-sponsored loot drop. He argues it functions like a plantation where men generate the capital and ex-wives, backed by state violence, collect the harvest.
It's a very aggressive metaphor.
It is. But what about the counter-argument? What about the deadbeat dad who abandons his kids and refuses to pay?
Well, Riker attacks the deadbeat dad narrative as a statistically fabricated cultural myth designed to justify the harshness of the system.
A myth.
Yeah. We all picture the wealthy executive hiding assets in offshore accounts while his kids starve. But Riker pulls data from the Urban Institute revealing that 60% of child support debtors actually earn under $10,000 a year.
Under $10,000 a year.
Yes. These are not wealthy men hiding assets. These are mechanics, retail workers, and disabled men who literally cannot afford the payments mandated by the court.
Yet despite their poverty, they are the ones being incarcerated. Riker notes that according to DOJ statistics, 97% of individuals jailed for non-payment of child support are men.
97%.
He calls these debtors' prisons daddy dungeons. He argues that Judge Judy's gavel has locked up more men than the cartel task forces. It is a system that criminalizes male poverty.
He argues it's a massive wealth transfer mechanism disguised as child welfare. And he highlights extreme legislative examples to prove that biology and truth are entirely secondary to resource extraction.
Oh, like the California law.
Exactly. For example, he discusses California's sperm jacker law.
I read that section 3 times to make sure I understood the mechanism. Under this precedent, a man can informally donate genetic material to a woman, have no legal or physical relationship with the child, and years later, if the mother files for state welfare, the state can sue the biological donor for retroactive child support to recoup their welfare costs.
Yep, completely blindsided.
Riker compares it to donating blood and getting a bill for a kidney transplant 10 years later.
It perfectly illustrates his thesis. The institutional system views men not as humans with rights, but merely as utilities, like financial batteries to be drained by the state on behalf of women.
And he argues this systemic presumption of male liability extends far beyond family courts and directly into criminal justice, specifically regarding domestic violence policies. This brings us to the Duluth model.
Yeah, this part is harrowing.
He opens this section with a story about Jared, an ER nurse in Minneapolis. In 2020, Jared arrives at a domestic violence shelter with a black eye, a split lip, and defensive wounds, like clearly the victim of severe abuse. And the intake staff turns him away at the door, citing a verbatim policy, "We only believe women."
That phrase, "we only believe women," is the distillation of the Duluth model.
The Duluth model.
Yeah, it's a framework developed in the 1980s by feminist sociologists in Duluth, Minnesota. It has since become the predominant paradigm adopted by police departments, courts, and shelters across the United States and the UK.
Wait, let's stop there and look at the mechanism. If this model was adopted globally by law enforcement and social services, it had to have some initial utilitarian logic, right?
Right.
What was the foundational justification for it before we get into Riker's critique?
Well, the foundational justification was an attempt to understand domestic violence not as a series of isolated interpersonal conflicts, but as a systemic issue. The creators of the Duluth model postulated that domestic violence is not caused by substance abuse, mental illness, or mutual toxicity. Instead, they argued that all domestic violence is rooted in the patriarchal structure of society.
Really?
Yes. The core premise is that male violence against women is a learned behavior designed to maintain male dominance and control over females.
So it inherently assumes that in any domestic dispute, the man is the aggressor, asserting patriarchal control, and the woman is the victim resisting it.
Exactly. It bakes a gendered assumption of guilt into the procedural response of law enforcement. If police arrive at a domestic disturbance, the Duluth framework encourages them to identify the primary aggressor based on power dynamics, which almost always defaults to arresting the male.
But Riker completely shatters this logic with a massive statistical contradiction. He pressed to CDC data tracking domestic violence rates across different sexual orientations.
The lesbian couple data.
Yes, the data shows that lesbian couples report domestic violence at triple the rate of gay male couples. If male dominance and the patriarchy are the root cause of all domestic violence, how does the Duluth model explain soaring violence rates in relationships where there are absolutely no men involved?
That is the gaping logical flaw that Riker exploits. He points out that when confronted with this data, defenders of the model attempted a staggering feat of ideological gymnastics.
What do they say?
They claim that abusive women in lesbian relationships are acting out internalized male privilege or mimicking patriarchal power structures.
So even when a woman hits another woman, it's still theoretically a man's fault?
Riker argues it's a closed ideological loop, designed to protect the premise that men are inherent moral monsters and women are perpetual moral infants.
And he asserts that this exact same presumption of male guilt has been institutionalized on college campuses through the weaponization of Title IX.
Oh, yeah, the Title IX campus tribunals.
He uses a chilling example from the University of Southern California in 2016. In a single semester, 23 male students were expelled based on Title IX accusations without any opportunity for cross-examination.
Without cross examination.
In one specific case, a university dean agreed to an expulsion based on an accusation where the accuser explicitly stated, "I don't recall when it happened or where it happened, but I'm sure he did it." How is that legally permissible in a university setting?
Because university Title IX tribunals do not operate under the constitutional standards of a criminal court. They operate under a preponderance of the evidence standard, which is much lower. And for a long time, the accused were denied the right to cross-examine their accusers or even see the evidence against them.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Riker draws a very dark, very specific historical parallel here. He compares modern university Title IX coordinators to the authors of the Malleus Maleficarum.
The 15th century Catholic treatise on hunting witches.
Yes. He argues the procedural playbook is identical. Step 1, accuse without evidence. In the 15th century, courts accepted spectral evidence, a claim that a witch's spirit attacked someone in a dream. Today, Riker argues, the equivalent is subjective emotional reality. I felt unsafe. Step 2, assume guilt immediately and isolate the accused. Burn the witch, or in today's terms, banish the frat boy from campus and destroy his reputation.
And step 3,
Profit. The church seized the property of convicted witches back then. Today, universities secure massive federal grants and justify the salaries of sprawling administrative bureaucracies by maintaining high Title IX compliance and conviction rates.
wow. So if we synthesize this, Riker is painting a picture of an environment that is biologically degrading male testosterone, paired with institutional systems, family courts, police frameworks, university tribunals that are meticulously designed to extract male resources, assume male guilt, and punish natural male behavior.
That's his core argument.
If a young man is born into this matrix, how does he react? What does this do to his psychology?
So Riker theorizes that this environment forces a bifurcation in the male population. Men are either systematically broken by the institutions, a process he calls institutional betification, or they attempt to escape the system entirely through digital virtual avenues.
Let's examine the betification process first, because Riker argues it begins long before a man ever reaches family court. It starts in the schools and the military.
Early on.
Yeah. He cites a 2023 UCLA study showing that 72% of Generation Z men report getting sweaty palms and elevated heart rates just thinking about having to change a flat tire on the side of the road.
Sweaty palms over a tire.
Now, I have to ask, is changing a tire really the ultimate metric of masculinity, or is he just cherry-picking a mechanical skill that happens to be outdated?
Riker isn't arguing that knowing how to use a lug wrench is the essence of manhood. He's using the tire as a proxy for mechanical competence and the ability to handle unexpected, stressful friction in the physical world. He contrasts this modern anxiety with the historical resilience forged by male-centric institutions. To prove how we've lost this, he looks at the military and high-stress professions.
He brings up a 2020 study from the Journal of Applied Psychology that analyzed unit cohesion in military platoons and firehouses.
Yes, the study found that units that still unofficially utilized initiation rituals, shared hardship, physical hazing, stressful rites of passage, exhibited 40% stronger interpersonal cohesion and better crisis response than units that adhered strictly to modernized, sanitized HR protocols.
He uses this incredible anecdote about Jeff Bezos to illustrate this. He calls it the no-fish trauma story.
Oh, that story's crazy.
Apparently, when Bezos was a teenager, the initiation to join a prestigious high school science club required him to swallow a live goldfish.
A live goldfish.
It was a bizarre, gross test of grit. Riker notes the profound irony that Amazon headquarters now explicitly enforces a no-fish trauma zone in their corporate HR policies. Riker argues that the very grit, tolerance for absurdity, and capacity for discomfort that Bezos relied on to build a trillion-dollar empire is now outlawed by his own HR department.
Yeah, Riker argues that modern anti-hazing mandates, like Harvard's strict no more hazing policies, are systematically destroying the mechanisms that build anti-fragility.
By protecting them from hardship.
By protecting young men from shared suffering, we are creating fragile leaders who fold under pressure. And he traces this war on boys down to the elementary school level, where natural male energy is heavily pathologized.
The statistics on ADHD are wild. He points out that 6 out of 10 male prisoners were at one point in their youth diagnosed with ADHD.
6 out of 10.
What's the implication here? Is he saying ADHD is fake, or is he saying our educational system is criminalizing boyishness?
He's arguing the latter. He contends that the modern American classroom is structurally designed for female developmental timelines. Sit still, be quiet, focus on passive tasks.
Right.
When a 5-year-old boy biologically fails to adapt to that unnatural environment, the system doesn't change the environment. It medicates the boy. We drug them with amphetamines like Adderall to force compliance.
He contrasts the American system with Finland's educational model. In Finland, boys are mandated to have a 15-minute outdoor, unstructured physical break every single hour of the school day.
Every hour.
And as a result, Finland produces world-leading test scores without mass drugging their youth. Whereas America produces a generation of young men who are addicted to TikTok and terrified of changing a tire. He even mentions a Boy Scout troop in Montana that banned campfires on a wilderness trip because the administration deemed it a fire risk.
A fire risk on a camping trip. He says we are actively teaching boys that discomfort is equivalent to oppression and risk is equivalent to abuse.
So put yourself in the shoes of a young man raised in that system. You've been medicated for being energetic, you've been taught that your natural instincts are toxic, and then you look ahead at the dating market and the family courts, and you realize the entire game is rigged against you. So what do?
You escape.
Exactly. Riker argues that millions of men are choosing to simply unplug. They retreat into what he calls the digital sim factory.
Yeah, this brings us to Riker's diagnosis of the modern mating crisis. He argues that men, terrified of the real-world liabilities associated with women and institutions, are abandoning the physical sexual marketplace for safe digital surrogates.
And the economics of this digital retreat are staggering. He breaks down the OnlyFans economy. The average American male subscriber is spending $7,200 a year on OnlyFans content.
Over $7,000.
Riker juxtaposes this against traditional global marriage economics. He points out that the average traditional dowry in India is roughly $6,000. American men are literally paying more annually for pixelated coochie, phrase, not mine, than it costs to officially wed and start a family in other parts of the world.
It represents a massive, unprecedented misallocation of male resources. And Riker argues it's driven entirely by profound conditioned fear.
How deep does that fear go?
To prove it, he cites a terrifying 2024 study out of Stanford University. Researchers surveyed Generation Z men, and 93% of them reported that they would rather perform a dangerous physical task. The specific hyperbole used was wrestle a rabid raccoon, then walk up to a woman in a public place and ask her out face to face.
93% would rather wrestle a raccoon.
If that Stanford number holds up under peer review, it suggests a profound psychological paralysis. 93% of a generation functionally unable to initiate the biological prerequisite for human reproduction.
That is just insane.
They are paralyzed by the fear of being labeled a creep, going viral on TikTok for approaching someone, or facing a Title IX accusation.
Riker illustrates this with the story of Hans, an electrician in Berlin, who decided to conduct a radical social experiment. Hans committed to doing 100 cold approaches, respectfully asking women out in cafes and bookstores.
And what happened?
Out of 100 attempts, 99 of the women called security or threatened to call the police on him simply for saying hello.
Simply for saying hello.
The 100th woman happened to be a recruiter for an intelligence agency. She actually offered him a job infiltrating secure facilities because, as she put it, modern real-world masculine confidence is so exceedingly rare, it is essentially a tactical superpower.
That is dark comedy at its finest. But what is the actual biological cost of this digital retreat? Because it isn't just a sociological issue of men not getting dates, right? Riker argues it's degrading their hardware.
Yes, the biological cost is profound. Riker references neuroscientists at Oxford who measured biometric responses during social interactions. They proved that a man approaching an attractive woman in real life, without a screen or an app mediating the interaction, spikes his adrenaline and cortisol levels higher than jumping out of an airplane.
Higher than base jumping.
It's a primal evolutionary stress test. The brain is calculating the risk of rejection, the social hierarchy, and the biological imperative all at once. Riker argues that when men reject this real-world friction for the sanitized safety of swiping on Tinder or paying for OnlyFans, They're letting their biological drive atrophy,
It's an evolutionary dead end.
which naturally leads to a counter-reaction. If men feel their biology atrophying, some try to violently reclaim it. This is where Riker discusses the nofap and semen retention movements.
Oh, this part gets wild.
These are subcultures of men who believe that by abstaining from pornography and masturbation, they can reclaim their primal energy and testosterone. Riker clearly sees the philosophical value in this rebellion, but he also highlights how absurdly extreme it can become.
He tells that story about the guy in Utah.
Yes. The man in Utah who literally attempted to sue Pornhub for damages, claiming their algorithm hijacked his dopamine. This same man apparently achieved a 120-day streak of absolute semen retention, felt so overwhelmed by raw, unbridled testosterone that he went into the woods and tried to physically wrestle a grizzly bear.
Riker notes, somewhat dryly, that the lawsuit supposedly settled out of court when the bear's legal counsel produced claw marks.
That's hilarious.
It is a comedic exaggeration, obviously, but it serves a very specific point. The underlying truth is that attempting to reclaim raw male biology in a society that is terrified of it can look completely unhinged.
Yeah, but Riker provides a vital reality check to his own audience here. He warns them against falling into what he calls the incel-Chad spectrum fallacy.
Right, he makes it very clear that simply abstaining from the internet isn't a magic bullet for success.
Exactly. Semen retention and logging off only work if you are actively channeling that reclaimed energy into the physical world. He bluntly states that the incel crying into his anime body pillow isn't going to spontaneously metamorphose into an alpha male just because he deleted his OnlyFans account.
Anti-fragility cannot be bought, and it cannot be achieved through passive abstinence. It is forged through action.
He says men must move from a state of self-pity to a state of creatine debt. They have to lift heavy iron, learn violent skills, and build physical competence.
So let's trace the logic path here. The dating market is a terrifying minefield of social cancellation. The family courts are a rigged wealth transfer mechanism. The digital escape of porn and video games is an evolutionary dead end.
Right.
If a man accepts all of Riker's premises, what is his rational response? How are men systemically reacting to this matrix?
This brings us to what Riker terms the marriage strike and the active avoidance of financial cuckoldry.
The marriage strike.
He argues that a massive cohort of men are waking up, doing the brutal mathematics of modern relationships, and simply opting out of the system entirely. They're refusing to participate.
He provides these fascinating, almost cyberpunk examples of guys who have just walked away from the societal script.
Oh, like Dave.
Dave, the diesel mechanic in Texas. Dave wants to buy expensive lift kits for his truck and fund his hobbies, but he refuses to risk his assets in a marriage. So he funds his lifestyle by selling his sperm online to fertility clinics for $200 a vial.
And he jokingly refers to himself as Sponsor Dad.
To sponsor dad, right. Then there's Tanaka in Tokyo, who was on the partner track at a major corporate firm, did the math on Japanese family law, and completely abandoned the corporate grind to live in a micro apartment and become a professional solitaire streamer on Twitch.
These are highly competent men who have realized the traditional path leads to catastrophic legal ruin, so they forge their own absurd parallel paths.
And the macroeconomic data supports this systemic withdrawal. Riker cites Gallup polling data from 2023, which shows that unmarried men over the age of 40 report vastly higher baseline happiness levels than their married counterparts.
Vastly higher.
He calculates an actuarial risk model, suggesting that for every year a man stays single past the age of 35, his statistical risk of becoming a human ATM in family court drops by 18%.
This leads to his analysis of the van life movement, which I found totally paradigm shifting.
The van life movement.
We typically think of van life as this trendy, Instagram aesthetic lifestyle for bohemian travel bloggers. Riker frames it as a modern underground railroad for men escaping the marriage plantation.
He looks at the ruthless economics of it.
Yes, he breaks down the math. It costs an average of $38,000 less annually to live in a retrofitted Sprinter van than it does to maintain a wife, a mortgage, and a suburban lifestyle.
$38,000.
But I have to ask, how is living in a van jurisdictional arbitrage, as he calls it? How does that protect a man legally?
Because of the mobility and the financial structure, Riker explains that these men park behind a Whole Foods, use a private VPN connection, and work remote tech jobs.
Oh, so they're untraceable.
Crucially, they demand to be paid in Bitcoin, and they structure their freelance work through anonymous LLCs registered in states with no income tax, like Wyoming or South Dakota.
That's incredibly smart.
By doing this, they become fiscal ghosts. They avoid state taxation, and more importantly, by holding assets in decentralized crypto wallets rather than traditional bank accounts, they ensure that no family court judge or divorce lawyer can ever locate, freeze, or garnish their wealth.
It's a technological bypass of the state's extraction mechanisms.
And a massive driver of this extreme legal paranoia is the epidemic of paternity fraud, which Riker covers extensively.
Oh, the numbers he throws out in this chapter are genuinely hard to process. He cites the CDC's 2020 data. Of the American men who suspected foul play and actively challenged their paternity in court, 68% ended up legally mandated to pay child support for children who DNA testing proved were not biologically theirs.
68%.
And in the UK, broader blood bank studies suggest that 1 in 25 fathers is unknowingly raising another man's genetic child.
The specific issue is where the ideological battle lines of Riker's book are drawn the starkest.
How so?
Riker points out a massive generational divide here. Polling shows that 54% of young people under the age of 35 support mandatory DNA testing at birth in the hospital. It seems like a perfectly logical scientific method to establish truth and prevent fraud.
Right.
Yet, feminist legal institutions and family courts vehemently lobby against mandatory testing laws.
Why? I genuinely want to understand the counter-argument here. If we value scientific truth, why would institutions fight against a simple cheek swab that establishes biological reality?
Well, Riker's analysis is that the courts fight it because family courts are not designed to be justice systems. They are designed to be wealth transfer mechanisms, prioritizing the financial stability of the mother and child above all else.
So the truth doesn't matter, just the money.
The system relies on the legal presumption of the husband's financial responsibility. If mandatory DNA testing proved widespread infidelity, it would break the financial chain, leaving the state on the hook to support those children.
I see.
Riker argues that any society or legal system that actively outlaws biological facts to protect a lie isn't defending women, it is defending state-enforced financial cuckoldry.
So we have painted an incredibly bleak dystopian picture. We have systemic institutional capture, biological degradation via the water supply, a rigged court system, and men retreating to vans and crypto wallets just to survive.
It's a lot.
If the book ended there, it would just be a manifesto of despair. But Riker transitions to a climax that is actually a radical underground blueprint for reclaiming masculinity. He calls it unlocking anti-fragility.
Correct. He isn't just diagnosing the terminal disease, he is prescribing a highly aggressive cure. And that cure involves completely abandoning the goal of reforming current systems and instead building parallel structures, what he calls the bastion economy.
The bastion economy.
But he argues that before men can build new structures, they have to reclaim a primal sense of justice. He calls this concept frontier justice or primal arbitration.
I love the example he uses to illustrate this because it is so chaotic and relatable. He tells the story of Bob from Tampa.
Oh, Bob and the Crickets.
Yes. Bob gets slapped with a $200 fine by his homeowners association because the grass on his front lawn is half an inch over the mandated limit.
Classic HOA.
Bob tries to play by the rules. He goes to the HOA board meeting, he argues his case, he even tries to fight it in small claims court, and the bureaucratic system just laughs at him and upholds the fine. So what does Bob do?
He resorts to primal arbitration.
He realizes the system is broken. He goes online, buys 10,000 live crickets in bulk, waits until 2 a.m., and releases the entire swarm under the garage door of the HOA president's house.
The fallout is biblical.
The crickets eat the drywall, they cover the president's Tesla in feces, the noise is deafening for weeks. And miraculously, Bob's $200 fine quietly disappears from the ledger. Bob becomes an underground legend in his neighborhood. Now, it's a funny story, but how does Riker elevate a prank with bugs into a sociological theory?
Riker uses Bob to make a profound point about the atrophy of bureaucratic justice. When systems like HR departments, civil courts, or HOAs become bloated, captured, and fail to provide equitable resolutions, men will naturally revert to primal arbitration.
Meaning they'll take matters into their own hands.
They bypass the failing system and inflict direct asymmetrical costs on their oppressors. To prove this is hardwired, Riker cites a 2020 Cambridge neurological study.
What did the study find?
The study showed that when men engage in this kind of adversarial strategic problem solving against an enemy, their prefrontal cortex lights up in the exact same neural pathways that activated in our ancestors during target acquisition when hunting mammoths.
That perfectly explains the massive popularity of video games like Bounty Hunter Simulator 2023. The game sold 2 million copies in a month. because it taps directly into that exact neural pathway.
Right. Boys instinctively crave the thrill of the hunt, the direct, unmediated application of justice, without having to consult a 400-page HR manual.
Exactly. And Riker argues that this primal drive isn't just about revenge or destruction. When harnessed correctly, it is the exact energy required to build strong, resilient communities. This is the foundation of the Bastion economy.
Riker provides several real-world examples of male-centric healing and community building that operate completely outside the progressive therapy speak paradigm.
He highlights an organization called the Sheer Brotherhood, operating in Detroit.
The barbershops.
These are inner-city barbershops where the barbers have been quietly trained in crisis counseling and stoic philosophy. And by simply talking to men man to man while cutting their hair, no mandated journals, no sitting in a circle identifying your inner child, no clinical language,
Just guys talking.
just guys talking. And these barbershops managed to cut the local male suicide rate in their zip code by 22% in just 18 months.
He pairs that with a macro example from Finland. In 2003, the Finnish government noted a spike in male depression. Instead of prescribing millions of SSRIs, they instituted a culture of mandatory male bonding saunas.
Complete with freezing ice fishing trips, right?
And, as Riker enthusiastically notes, vodka enemas. And the clinical result, national male suicides dropped by 41%.
It seems to categorically prove his point. Men heal and thrive in spaces that prioritize physical action, shared hardship, and shoulder-to-shoulder activity over face-to-face emotional processing. They need spaces that are inherently hierarchical, slightly dangerous, and rough around the edges.
He even points to controversial groups to prove the efficacy of male peer pressure. He mentions the Proud Boys, specifically their internal fraternal order of responsibility.
Okay, controversial for sure. What's the context there?
By instituting harsh, uncompromising peer pressure and accountability patrols where members literally threatened to drag each other out of the driver's seat with a tire iron if they tried to drive drunk, they dropped DUI rates among their active members by 58%.
58% drop in DUIs just from threat of violence from their friends.
He also discusses a decentralized internet movement called the Black and Yellow Diet. Members formed online pacts to quit soy and processed foods cold turkey after being radicalized by memes about estrogen.
Radicalized by memes.
Within a year, self-reported surveys showed a massive drop in their reliance on SSRI antidepressants compared to the general population baseline.
So the Bastion economy is about health and justice, but it's also about building alternative educational systems to save the next generation from the schools.
This part's fascinating.
He profiles a figure, Pastor Jedediah Boone, who runs a Bible and Bullets seminary in rural Missouri. These young men are cleaning AR-15 rifles on the workbench in between deep readings of Scripture. Boone explicitly states he is teaching them crisis leadership and tactical competence instead of passive theology.
And out west in Montana, there are networks of what Riker calls silent schools. These are underground co-ops where 14-year-old boys are earning their high school STEM credits by learning to field strip rifles blindfolded and machine their own engine parts. They are actively replacing the public school system that they feel is chemically castrating and pathologizing their sons.
It's a total, unapologetic rejection of the captured institutions. They're not asking for permission to exist. They are building the lifeboats while the Titanic sinks.
While it goes down, yeah.
And the final, perhaps most potent frontier of this systemic rebellion is digital. Riker calls this chapter mimetic warfare and techno-masculinity.
Mimetic warfare.
This is how they fight back against the overarching cultural narrative. They weaponize absurdity because logic doesn't work against captured institutions.
Riker details the spectacular failure of Pepsi's They Won marketing campaign.
Oh, that was wild.
A corporate board decided to release gender-neutral soda cans. In response, an anonymous collective on 4chan launched an AI-driven meme campaign dubbed Operation Masked for Mask.
That's hilarious.
They used artificial intelligence to spam the brand's social media feeds with hyper-realistic generated ads of jacked, shirtless dads aggressively grilling steaks while crushing Pepsi cans.
It worked.
The juxtaposition was so hilarious and overwhelming that Pepsi's sales in key demographics dropped 18% in 3 months. As Riker summarizes it, mockery melts soy.
Gen Z is using this tactic brilliantly. He cites instances of college students deep-faking Karl Marx into Portland City Council Zoom calls just to make the bureaucratic safetyism look utterly absurd to the public.
He calls memes cognitive machetes used to hack through progressive linguistic framing, but the techno-masculinity goes far deeper than just internet ranks. Riker discusses how men are applying elite tactical frameworks to their personal legal lives.
Like what?
He details how men in the Bastion economy use the OODA loop during hostile divorce mediations.
Let's break that down. Because I know the OODA Loop Observe, Orient, Decide Act was developed by military strategist John Boyd for fighter pilots in dogfights. How on earth does a guy use a fighter pilot framework while sitting across a conference table from a divorce attorney?
Riker explains the mechanics of the mediation room. The opposing attorney relies on predictability. They expect the man to act out of anger, fear, or a desire to appease. That is the attorney's orientation.
Okay, so the man knows this.
The man using the OODA loop observes this expectation. He orients himself by utilizing foundational manosphere texts like Rollo Tomasi's The Rational Male as literal psychological operations manuals.
Wow.
He decides to act in a way that completely shatters the attorney's paradigm, perhaps by displaying total chilling stoicism or strategically agreeing to a minor concession that sets a legal trap regarding asset valuation down the line.
Getting inside their head.
By acting faster and more unpredictably than the lawyer anticipates, he gets inside the lawyer's decision cycle, outmaneuvering them to secure his assets in custody.
And when all the psychological tactics and legal maneuvering fails, Riker points out that these men bypass the system entirely through sheer brute force technological innovation.
The 3D printing stuff.
He points to the explosion of 3D printing in the Bastion economy. Every guy sitting in a suburban basement teaching himself CAD design on YouTube and machining untraceable lower receivers for firearms out of polymer blocks is a walking middle finger to the safety state.
They are bypassing the government's monopoly on force and manufacturing.
Riker has this incredibly potent line. Every Jackson skipping college to machine lowers in his garage is Darwin's fist bump. They are taking the tools of modernity, steel, silicon, and code, and using them to brew the exact antidote to a society that told them their innate masculinity was toxic.
If we pull back and synthesize all of this material, the takeaway is profound. Whether you agree with Riker's foundational premises, whether you find his biological data conclusive, or whether you find his political views absolutely extreme and offensive, Mending Broken Men provides a necessary, unfiltered look at a rapidly expanding demographic. We are looking at a massive cohort of highly capable men who genuinely, deeply feel that the modern world has pathologized their very nature, their biology, and their historical utility.
And the crucial shift is this. They're no longer just complaining about it anonymously on internet forums. They are actively, physically building parallel societies, parallel economies, and alternative educational systems in direct opposition to the mainstream.
Which leaves us with a massive, incredibly provocative thought to ponder as we wrap up.
What's that?
We have spent this entire deep dive unpacking Riker's core argument that modern institutions have been captured by ideologies that actively penalize and extract resources from traditional masculinity.
Yeah.
If his diagnosis is even partially correct, and if this underground bastion economy continues to scale and grow, what happens next?
That's the question.
What happens when an entire generation of the most mechanically and technologically competent men successfully figures out how to completely unplug from the matrix? When they permanently remove their labor, their tax dollars, their technological innovation, and their physical protection from mainstream society.
Does the system find a way to adapt, renegotiate the social contract, and reintegrate them? Or does the system, starved of that foundational male energy and tax revenue, collapse entirely under its own bureaucratic weight?
Exactly. Are we looking at a society that has become too heavily padded, too soft, and too captured to survive the jagged edge of the frontier when it inevitably returns?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question. And if you look at the historical cycles of civilizations, the answer to that question is rarely peaceful, and it is never gentle.
It absolutely never is.
And that is going to do it for our deep dive today. Remember, if you want to explore these highly controversial arguments, look at the data sets for yourself and understand the mechanics of the batched economy. You need to check out Mending Broken Men by Conrad Riker.
You can grab a copy right now on Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books.
And you should definitely follow his ongoing work and essays at Conrad Riker on Substack.
And as always, thank you for joining us as we navigate these complex waters.
Please take a second right now to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this deep dive with anyone, friends, family, or colleagues who needs to hear it and understand these cultural shifts. Until next time, stay curious.